Hi everyone, I'm finally back with some more PoE content. I have been dormant here for a while I was focusing on other things. But I want to highlight my character that I've played here in Sentinel League, an Explosive Concoction Scion. So this has been on my to-do list ever since Explosive Concoction came out. I did have a lot of fun with Poisonous Concoction last league with an Occultist, and this time around this was the build that I played. It's the only build that I made, and it worked out splendidly. I managed to complete 38 challenges with this. I only have the 2 grinds left, so I've killed all the Uber bosses. I've done the Simulacrum Wave 30. I've done 200 Simulacrum sprinters in one map. All that stuff with this character on a total budget of around 20 exalts. So after some initial difficulties of trying to figure out the right setups, I was actually pleasantly surprised by the power of this build. It worked really well. It is fairly tanky, it is fairly fast. And I think this is an overall really solid, all-rounder build, actually. I did this as a Scion, mostly just because, so I didn't really have a plan when I started this league. I just jumped in there and my fiancé said, why don't you play a Scion? And I was like, alright. And then this is what I made. I did some initial experimentation about what I would do, and then I decided on Explosive Concoction, because you can take the Pathfinder nodes as a Scion, so you have the extra flask charges that help you keep this whole thing going, which is very important. And aside from this, yeah, I tried to make this like an Explosive Concoction Ignite build, but that didn't work out at all. I think if you want to play this as an Ignite build, then Elementalist is the way, and basically the only way, because of the extra Ignite bonuses you can get there by igniting with all of your damage, which is not really achievable otherwise. And you also get more bonuses there. So I very quickly recognized that trying to ignite is not gonna work, and I swapped away from that to a crit-based hit damage build, and that worked much better. The number one mechanic that I use to scale up my damage is the Secrets of Suffering, where you get Scorch, Brittle, and Sap ailments instead of Chill, Freeze, and Shock and Ignite. So you can get this from the Interrogations, small cluster jewel. So this is by far the most expensive part of the build, which costs, I think, something like 6 or 7 exalts when I bought it. And yeah, it basically constitutes like half or so, or a third of the total cost of the build. And most of the other items are actually fairly budget. So yeah, later on, once I had a bit more currency, I started investing maybe 2, 3, 4 exalts on the bigger pieces, like a nice pair of boots, like a good shield. I spent I think 4 exalts as well on my chest. So this is kind of the range of the more expensive items. And then the cheaper stuff, like some rings and the belt, they were an exalt, maybe slightly less even in some cases. There's a few more exalts that went also into smaller things like cluster jewels, Elvish implicits, the anointment on the amulet, and of course getting some nice rolled flasks, which is kind of important on a flask-based build. But yeah, this is basically it, and the total cost ended up somewhere around 20 exalts. So it was one of the cheaper builds I made recently. Usually I'm more in the range of 30, 40 exalts for my endgame gear, but yeah, I want to stop there. And then I started doing all those Uber bosses. I had a lot of fun, trying those Uber bosses that are, not an exact pushover, but I did manage to beat them quite easily most of the time. Aside from the Exarch, basically all the Uber bosses went down in the first or maybe second try, and I did this basically blind, so I didn't really check out the strategies or what actually changes. So I just went in there, and I didn't have too much of a difficult time there. Seeing Exarch did cost me quite a lot of currency though, so I think I spent 30 exalts or so just trying Exarch until he finally went down. It was really close, and I was kind of in one-shot territory without my Molten Shell up when I got hit by these balls in the ball phases. And some other attacks are also very dangerous on Exarch. I believe he's gonna get tuned down in the future a little bit at least. If you want, you can definitely pour a lot more currency into this build and make it even stronger. I think defensively I'm already in a good spot here, but you can definitely scale out the damage by another, ×2, ×3 or more, and you will completely annihilate everything in the game with ease. So I was kind of at the point where T60 bosses would melt in a second. And then, those pinnacle bosses, yeah, I can kill them in, not too much time, a minute or 2 or 3. And then this was basically it for me for what I wanted to invest in this character. So I have my imported Path of Building here that I also have linked in the description if you want. Unfortunately, after PoB update, my old Path of Building broke, so I don't have my old items here from like the league start when I was just running on like the super bare basic budget. So I only have my Endgame gear here, but I will maybe try to make like an updated like full build guide. Just want to show you a bit like what I did here, but most of the items are just fairly basic yellows. As you can see, everything is yellow items here. I do have a Forbidden Flame or Forbidden Flash for the Raider Ascendancy, so this cost me also like maybe 2 exalts or so. It wasn't very expensive. So the combo I did was Raider, Pathfinder, and Berserker. So Pathfinder is kind of required for the flash charges, I believe. And then we had Berserker, which I really liked with this rage mechanic and the Berserk itself. So I was playing around like nuke phases with focus plus Berserk, and that actually went really well. So I liked that a lot. And then we also had the Raider, which just has a bunch of, really useful stats. So you get a bit of move speed, you have easier time capping a spell suppression, which I stacked to 100%. You get the onslaught at all times, basically, so you don't need to rely on like certain like onslaught effects. And you get the frenzy charges basically for free as well. And you have phasing. So it's just like a good package. And you can just try to buy whatever is like the cheapest out of these three. Or you can even go for some other extra ascendancies. For example, something like Elementalist is not bad. You can even do something like Inquisitor for the penetration. You can even do stuff like Slayer or even the Juggernaut. So there are a bunch of options if you want to include a Forbidden Flame or Forbidden Flash. And since Scion is generally not really played all that much and there's so many different combos, most of these jewels don't really seem very overpriced. Yeah, aside from this, the interrogation, as I had mentioned in the start, very important, and the rest is just basic gear. So I was stacking the resist, of course, I was stacking a bunch of attributes. You need to have 155 strength to get your auras going, and 111 int. I actually had way too much here. And then you also want the spell suppression and a lot of accuracy, actually. So there is a lot of competition for stats on suffixes, so you really have to try to get those suffixes right at least, because it's kind of hard to stack accuracy on this. And since you want to reach 100% crit chance, you definitely want to have 100% hit chance as well to make sure you don't lose out. And I think I had like 3 really high accuracy rolls here, as you can see. And this was kind of necessary to cap it. On the prefixes, it was mostly stacking life and then armor and evasion where possible. So there's not really that much else to gain. You can get a bit of like elemental damage with attacks, for example, like here on the amulet, and I think I had it on the ring as well. Also had this minus mana cost, but I think this was not even that required in the end. I had a lot of unreserved mana that potentially you could also use for a precision aura to make up for a bit of accuracy loss maybe somewhere. But yeah, these are my items. Most of them I just try to buy for, as cheap as possible. I'm usually trying to snipe items more than I craft them. I did craft a helm myself, so I got this base with the right enchant, fairly cheap from a friend of mine. And yeah, this enchant is worth nothing. And I just tried to like roll a bit with, I think, life essences. Managed to hit like a really good one with spell suppression and accuracy, a bunch of res. So this turned out really well. And didn't really cost too much. And then, yeah, most of the other items I just try to buy from the market. If you want to get really good, cheap jewels, you go for something like this. So triple crit multi with global crit multi, and then like cold skills, lightning skills, fire skills. Like the explosive concoction has all the tags in the world. So it's very easy to get these triple crit multi jewels. They cost basically nothing because no one plays these builds here. And you can even get like a 4th useful stat, something like the mana cost, or maybe something like crit chance even, or maybe some attack speed. So whatever you find for just a few chaos in some cases. Here's also the rest of the tree. Unfortunately, as I mentioned, my old PoB is not working, so I don't have the leveling tree and I don't have the like non-cluster tree right now. But maybe I'll make like a full leveling, full build guide and everything included when the next league launches, and this still looks really solid. But if you just want to see it here, so we started out on the Scion area, I pathed over here to the Ranger, and we took the cluster jewel here and the cluster jewel down here. Very important is the point blank. We have a bunch of spell suppression, a bunch of masteries that go with that. I pick up all the life I can on the way, and a bunch of flask nodes here, so this is very important. So you get extra charges here, you get increased charges gained, you have a bunch of extra damage here from Forces of Nature. So there is a lot of like really high value passives all along this way that yeah, just give you lots of really good stats. Mana Leech is covered here. We have the Life Leech covered in the cluster, so I think you could also get Mana Leech from another notable here if you try to change that around a little bit. What I found quite important is the medium cluster jewels to give you a chance to deal double damage, pressure points. So I think I had 2 of those, so 10% chance to deal double damage, because our average damage per hit with this explosive concoction is actually fairly low, especially when you go to like pinnacle bosses. You just don't really do that much damage to actually inflict really high ailments, and we really rely on big ailments. So you can see this here. I try to stack up more ailment effect, for example, from the critical mastery. I also had those nodes here from Primeval Force with the extra ailment effect earlier, but I changed that later on. But in general, I try to get some ailment effect just to make sure that I have big like Scourge, Brittle, and Sap to give me extra offense and defense, especially the Brittle. You want to hit the 100% crit chance. Lastly, quite important, I want to talk about the flasks and also how I use them. So we have a Granite Flask here. We have the 7 charges when you're hit by an enemy with increased armor. Just very nice, very defensive option. We have the Sapphire and the Topaz to give us the extra damage from the Explosive Concoction skill. So especially on long boss fights, you want to make sure you don't press those 2 flasks very much. But if you continuously take damage and you recharge them from this gain charges on hit, then this is fine. So for mapping, I put the reduce effect of curses on one of those, just so that in mapping you refill them anyway, and then yeah, you don't have any issues with curses. It's very nice. Here's another one with increased attack speed, just extra DPS basically. And finally, I had a Quicksilver with increased effect and increased movement speed. So while mapping, I was able to constantly keep up all of those flasks, and then on boss fights, I would usually just use the Granite and the Quicksilver and not touch my Sapphire and my Topaz flasks. Theoretically, if you are really into bossing, you can also put in an, I think, Instilling Orb. So this is something that you could consider, at least for, you know, defeating the hard Uber bosses and stuff like that. So I did actually do that, I think, on 1 or 2 of those fights, but generally I didn't really like it at all when I was mapping, so I just removed that again afterwards. And here's my life flask. So this one is what I used for bleed immunity and just bubbling effect for instant recovery, kind of nice. My Pantheons are the Soul of the Brine King for the freeze immunity mostly, so this just makes everything much smoother. But you can change that to Lunaris or Solaris depending on what you like. And if you get the freeze immunity, for example, from the life flask, if you get, for example, a corrupted blood immunity jewel somewhere, then you can change this to freeze immunity and you can change it around. And for the small Pantheon, I had the Soul of Rizlatha or also the Soul of Garakan with the reduced effect of shock. But I didn't really need this much anymore later on because I was farming Harvest quite a bit and was able to get a lot of jewels that have reduced effect of shock. So I think I stacked like 60% or 75% reduced effect of shock on me just from those Harvest crafts. And it was kind of pointless to keep that Pantheon later on. And that's pretty much it for my build. So as I mentioned, I might make like a full build / leveling guide for this when the next league comes. I just want to give an overview of what I did here, how it worked, and yeah, I personally had a lot of fun with this build, so I can just recommend it. It seems to work on fairly small budget, and just really fun to play in my opinion. To give you a few short pointers about the early game with this, so I did level this as a Spectre Helix character, basically not investing like anything into any kind of damage, because on the Scion side there's not really that much for the start. I would probably recommend trying to make like a spell build out of it for the early acts, and then just taking enough regrets and swapping it to Explosive Concoction later. I did that switch, I believe, in Act 6. And yeah, as I said, I was experimenting with Ignite versions and stuff like that, which didn't really work. So I would go straight for like a hit-based Explosive Concoction build from that point. Anyway, hope you enjoyed my build overview here. Let me know what you think. Let me know how your league went and what you played. Subscribe for more PoE content, and I'll see you guys next time.